Karen and Lauren, thank you so much for being with us today. Karen, could you take us back in time to when you first found out you were pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
What was going through your mind, and what influenced you to want to get an abortion?
So I found out I was pregnant in March when I was an 18-year-old college freshman, and it was a surreal moment. I couldn't believe that I was in that situation, and I had no plan of having the baby. I was very determined to graduate from college and be a successful professional person, you know. So when I found out I was pregnant, I was about 8 weeks. And where I lived in Arkansas, the closest abortion clinics were in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So my best friend from high school came and got me. I had an appointment in Tulsa. This was way before the days of cell phones. And we drove to Tulsa, and the streets in Tulsa are numbered such that there's like, you know, the north, first, second, third, and then there's like the south, or, you know, something like that. And we went to the wrong address. And there was not an abortion clinic there. And we had to go to a payphone and call the clinic, and they said that by the time we would get to where they were, that I would have missed my appointment. So we just had to go back to the University of Arkansas in defeat. And so I immediately made another appointment, and we went back days later. They did abortions up to 12 weeks. So I had plenty of time. And when I got there, they did an ultrasound, which I didn't even know what that was. But their ultrasound showed that I was more than 12 weeks pregnant. So legally, they couldn't do the abortion. So once again, we went back to Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I knew that there was a clinic in Little Rock, Arkansas, that did abortions to 15 weeks. So I got another friend to agree to take me to that clinic. There are so many miracles that happened in this story. The night before the abortion, my boyfriend was going to drive me home through the mountains. And there was so much fog in the mountains that we had to turn around and go back. We couldn't continue because he couldn't see the road. And so my friend came and got me the next day, and we went to Little Rock. And they did abortions to 15 weeks, and I measured more than 15 weeks. And so, you know, at some point, you know, I realized that, what the heck? Like, what is happening here? At the clinic in Little Rock, they told me about a clinic in Dallas that would do abortions up into 20 weeks. So I made a plan with my same friend, and we traveled to Dallas to go to that clinic. Of course, the first thing that they did was an ultrasound, and of course, I measured more than 20 weeks. And, you know, even all of the talk of weeks, you know, in my mind, I had no picture in my mind of like what a baby at that number of weeks looks like. It didn't mean anything to me. So my friend and I set off for Dallas and got to the clinic. Of course, the first thing they did was an ultrasound. And of course, she measured more than 18 weeks. And so it was at that point that I realized that something larger than myself was controlling the situation. So that clinic told me about a sister clinic in Dallas that did abortions to 22 weeks, or 21?
22.
22. And I knew that if I left that first clinic to go to the second, that the ultrasound would show I was more than 22 weeks, because that was the pattern. So, I just crumbled, and kind of had a meltdown, and asked them if I could take their ultrasound with me to the second clinic. And the other clinic agreed to it. I went to the clinic, and at that gestation, the abortion at that time, it was a 2-day procedure. So on day 1, they insert dehydrated seaweed into your cervix, and as it, I guess, absorbs body fluids overnight, then it forces the cervix open. So I had the procedure started, and my friend's sister lived in Dallas, so we were staying at her house, and she was not happy about me staying at her house, and she was pregnant as well, about the same number of weeks as I was. And she had, in talking with her sister, her sister told her, I bet she even feels the baby moving and doesn't even know what it is. And so my friend asked me, do you feel the baby moving? I'm like, no. And she said, well, do you feel like fluttery feelings, or something that might feel like gas? And I said, yeah. And she said, that's the baby moving. And of course I had no concept. I didn't know that. So as the night wore on and I was hurting, I was essentially in labor. And William kept calling me, begging me not to have the abortion. And finally, around midnight, I told him that if you'll come to Dallas, and he was in Arkansas, if you'll come to Dallas and meet me at the clinic in the morning, I'm 95% sure I won't have the abortion. And so he did come, and when I got off the elevator, he was standing there. We went into the doctor's office and told him that I had changed my mind. He told us that there was a very good chance that I would miscarry anyway, because I was fully dilated, and that I needed to, lie down in the car on the way home with my feet elevated and, just hope for the best. Mm-hmm. So that's what we did. And William had arranged for a doctor visit for me when we got back to Little Rock. And the doctor checked me, and my cervix was closed, in his words, tight, and there was nothing to worry about. And then Lauren was born prematurely, and we don't really know why. But that's part of her story. It's interesting because I had planned with the doctor's office to put the baby up for adoption. And because I went into premature labor, like, no one at the hospital knew that I was planning to give her up. And after she was born, a while after, one of the nurses asked me if I wanted to see her. And I said, sure. And after I saw her, I knew that I couldn't give her away.
Your dad fought for you really hard.
He did.
And then you fought for her too. To sit in a car ride with your legs up, to turn back course when you've been so dead set. Our human pride gets in the way. Mm-hmm. That took a lot of humility and a lot of courage to reach out and ask for help. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times people don't feel that they can.
Right. I would also like to tell you that another part of the story is the fact that I did not have support at home for a pregnancy. And so William had also, in a God way, everything was a God thing, but God intervened and also found a place for me to live while I completed the pregnancy. And I think one of the major obstacles for a especially young woman who's unmarried to bring a pregnancy to term, an unwanted pregnancy to term, is, you know, lack of support and not having a place to go, not feeling supported. And this family that I moved in with not only supported me emotionally and financially, you know, because I ate their food and I slept in their house, but they were my biggest cheerleaders, and they wanted me and encouraged me, you know, to have the baby. And so I'm bringing that up because I think, especially as the church, we need to think in those terms of, you know, it's good to provide money for causes, but it's maybe even better to provide tangible love and support and a place to go for someone who would otherwise not have their baby.
Karen, could you talk to us about Lauren's birth and just the challenges that you had?
So actually, when Lauren was born, you know, she was unexpected at the time that she came. I woke up in the middle of the night and was cramping and felt like I needed to go to the bathroom. I just knew that things were not right. I went and woke Jana up, the lady that I was living with, and told her what was happening. She told me that we needed to go to the emergency room. So we did. They checked me and determined that I was in labor and that there wasn't anything that they could do to stop it. At that time, I was 26 weeks. So she was born at just after 8 o'clock in the morning. And it all happened so quickly that there wasn't any planning going on. It just happened really fast. My water never broke. She was born in the amniotic sac. And so they popped the bubble and rushed her off to the NICU, after she was born. And actually William went to the NICU with her. And I found myself alone in the room and didn't really, know where to go from here. During the time that I was living with Bill and Jana, William and I, it was kind of like we started our relationship over, in the right way. And but we still were talking about getting married. And Lauren ended up being in the hospital until she had to weigh 4.5 pounds before they would let her go home. When she was born, she weighed 2 pounds 6 3/4 ounces. As all babies do, she lost weight at the beginning. At her lowest, she was at 1 pound 15 ounces. And she couldn't nurse because the amount of calories it would take to nurse didn't offset the nourishment that she would get. So I had to pump milk for her, and so we developed quite a relationship because I had to go to the hospital every day to deliver milk, and we couldn't hold her for a really long time because she was too small. Most premature babies, their lungs are not fully developed. And so she was on 100% oxygen after she was born. And William sat with her all day and held the tip of his finger. And as the day progressed, she eventually weaned off of the oxygen, which was totally a God thing because she was so premature. So after she weaned off of the oxygen, it was really just a matter of her growing big enough to go home.
So Lauren, how's your health now?
It's great. Miraculously, I haven't had a lot of complications from my premature birth. I've always had lung problems from being a preemie. I had bouts with pneumonia and bronchitis in the croup, and was in and out of the hospital some as a child. and had asthma a little bit as a child, but I outgrew those things. So today I'm alive and healthy, and it's a miracle.
And Lauren, what was it like for you to first hear the full story of your birth? What did that feel like?
I was an adult when I first found out my story, and it was shocking. It was not something I ever expected. I had always known that I was born 13 weeks premature, but that was the extent of what I knew. And so to find out there was so much more to the story and abortion was involved was really surprising.
And Karen, if she found out at 21, then you must have been carrying the secret with you for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I describe it like it was a book, and I put it up on the shelf, and I never took the book down again. So it wasn't something that I ever even thought about. It certainly isn't anything that I plan to talk about. And we just got on with life. And then, of course, when I felt compelled to tell her, then that book had to come down with all of its emotions and trauma and all those old feelings, came back.
What has forgiveness looked like for each of you, and how has that concept impacted your relationship together?
Well, for me, I knew right away when my mom told me my story that I was called to forgive her. And I think God had prepared me for that moment through a whole series of circumstances. And at the end of our conversation, I remember telling her, Mom, God's forgiven you, and I forgive you too. So that was very immediate for me, and I hope that helped her heal in some way from the beginning.
And of course, I was afraid when I told her because I didn't know how she would react. I ran the risk of alienating her, when I told her. And we did not have a bad relationship, so that wasn't something I wanted. But I had strongly felt like, for an unknown reason, that God wanted me to tell her that. So I did.
Lauren, what was it like for you when you first met other abortion survivors?
It was a surreal experience. I call it a club. This title of abortion survivor is not really a club that you ever plan to be a part of. And none of us knew our stories. Most of us were adults when we found out, and we didn't choose to be a part of this club. But we know that God chose each one of us, and that He miraculously saved our lives for a purpose. And to be able to share in this journey together with other abortion survivors has been very healing and very powerful. And as you can imagine, all of our stories are very different. Some much more traumatic than others. And it's just been a life-changing experience, is the only way I can describe it, to learn other abortion survivor stories and to be able to walk this journey together.
What role has prayer played in the story for each of you?
In my case, my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he was behind the scenes praying that God would intervene in my choice, to have an abortion. And if you've heard my story, then you know that God intervened multiple times, to the point that after a while I realized that I was fighting against God, and I was determined to win that fight. But then when it really came down to it, I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill my baby. I think about the amount of trauma that I have carried around for, I don't know how long ago I told Lauren her story, but many years.
20 plus years.
Yeah. I can't imagine the amount of guilt and trauma that women who actually succeed in having an abortion must have. And they look at abortion as an easy fix. That's how I looked at it. Mm-hmm. But you don't think about the spiritual and psychological and emotional consequences of a choice like that.
Looking at your 3 beautiful children, mm-hmm. and all your grandchildren, mm-hmm. would you do anything differently? Or like, what would your words be to a young woman who finds herself in the situation you were in?
Well, of course, I wish I had, done things differently. But I can't, I can't go back. But if I were speaking to someone who was considering abortion, I wish that they could look at us and see that having a baby out of wedlock or as a young woman, it's hard. But I think the alternative is way harder. And then I wish they could see that you can live happily ever after, that's how I feel.
Lorna, you've had time to reflect on your story and on your mom's story. Is there anything else you'd like to add that you'd like people to walk away with?
Every life that God creates is a miracle. You don't have to have a story like mine to know that God knits every single baby together in their mother's womb, and that they're fearfully and wonderfully made by Him. We live in a world that tells us that unexpected pregnancy is all about the mom's choice. But there are two human beings, and one of them is hand knit together by God. And so I think that it's so important for people to understand the humanity behind this issue of abortion, and that we're talking about two lives here and not just one. And I'm just so thankful that God intervened in such a miraculous way in my story, that He made it clear that He had a purpose and a plan for my life, and I'm not the only one. He has a purpose and a plan for every life that He creates, and there's power in choosing life, and there's power in the prayers that my dad prayed. There's power in my mom's courage to say yes and to give me life, and I'm just so thankful to be able to be here and to be able to share that.
And we're thankful to God and to you both just for being here and sharing your story. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.